Good afternoon again, Madam Chair, members of the board, and Superintendent Davis. Today I will report on insights from the current legislative cycle and its impact on our current fiscal year and our outlook for the FY23 budget development. I'll start with a review of how state legislative activity is impacting our current fiscal year, FY22, which ends June 30th of 2022. So, on the left-hand portion of this upcoming slide, I have outlined the key components of the governor's proposed amendments to the state budget that would affect the FY22 state budget, particularly around education. To start, the governor has proposed a mid-year restoration of austerity. Austerity is the fiscal practice administered by the Georgia Department of Education, GDO, where they withhold funds from schools that they would have otherwise earned based on the student population that they serve. And so for our context, that amount in FY22 was $9.4 million. The governor also proposed that school systems should receive funding to distribute one-time supplements of $2,000 to full-time state-funded staff and $1,000 one-time supplements to several other job families. Now I'm going to layer in the state's proposed budget amendment on top of our local financial experiences. So looking at the right-hand part of the slide here, you'll see in this first column that represents the adopted budget for FY22. And I'll point out that we were expecting to use $6 million of federal funding so that we were able to balance our budget. In that very next column, this is where those amendments start to come into play. So the $7 million that you see listed here is our anticipation of the net receipts we'll get for state austerity once it's relieved, because the local 5 mil share will have to be paid back. That $2 million that you see here, that is related to the board's August activity where we made critical investments that would support recruitment and hiring for some key challenges in nutrition, in transportation, and in our nursing clinic aides. As I shared in my prior report, there is strong performance and growth in the local Henry County economy, and therefore we are anticipating that local receipts could exceed our budgeted expectations by nearly $6 million. If realized, these shifts in the state and local revenue outlook for FY22 would move us from a position of using federal funds to balance the budget to a position where restored funds can support the extension of the governor's proposed supplement to all full-time Henry County employees at a supplement value of $2,000. We await the state taking action on the amended FY22 budget to fund the supplements proposed. We will seek to bring a recommendation to the board regarding distribution of one-time supplements during the current FY22 fiscal year, post the state adopting those proposed amendments. We will now turn our attention to FY23, so moving our minds to next fiscal year, which will be the year that ends June 30th, 2023, and I will provide an outlook of the macro level indicators that impact the budget planning. So to start, I am certain that you've heard the reports of the positive trends in Georgia's overall economy, and this does manifest in the proposed investments in education at the state level, with increases in the Georgia Department of Education's general funds year over year of 5%. It is of interest, however, that in the FY23 plan, it is 4% less than the state's amended FY22 budget that is currently under consideration. However, overall, this is a positive indicator for our local budget development process. Another positive indicator is that we expect that state austerity will be eliminated completely in FY23. There will be no holdbacks. There are two indicators that are positive but do have some offsets when we locally implement them and extend them. The first is related to the increase in the Teacher Retirement System Contribution Rate, or TRS, from 19.81% to 19.98%. While Godot provides funding for the TRS contribution for the employees that we receive the state funding for, the board will need to consider use of local funds when we do that contribution here locally for the employees that we do not receive state funding for. The same applies for the $2,000 salary increase for teacher salary scales that's proposed by the governor. Our school system will receive increased state funding attributable to the scale increase, and this board will have to consider the use of local funding sources to extend this proposal, excuse me, to staff members that are not funded by the state. Finally, there are two indicators that we anticipate will have a negative impact on state level funding, and I will review the equalization grant and the local 5 meal share in more depth to support the board's and community's understanding. So starting with the equalization grant and the local 5 meal share, these are components of the state's funding formula for education, and both are reliant on a local tax digest, which is the collection of property within the county and a value associated with it. So we're going to walk through these for just a minute before I talk about the implications for Henry County Schools specifically. Starting with the equalization process, it considers the tax digest wealth of all the counties in Georgia and then rank orders them. Then they take all of those counties and develop a statewide average. They will then apply a grant to any school system whose funding is below that average, essentially to equalize them up so that everyone has equal capacity and opportunities in Georgia. The local 5 meal share is the state's expectation that at a minimum, every county in Georgia will contribute at least 5 meals to educate its students. The state reviews the tax digest, they perform the calculation, and then they withhold that money from the QBE funds or the quality basic education funds that they send to us. So what does this all mean? Because we have seen that strong growth in the local economy, we can anticipate that we might see a decline. If you look here, you'll see the trending of equalization over the years. And we've seen a steady decline in that equalization grant through 2020, and many of you will recall the significant drop we saw in FY21 when we lost $12.3 million in the equalization grant. While we do not yet have the information regarding the current calculations from the state, because it requires, again, all counties to be reviewed, we do know that the FY20 digest, or the 2020 digest, which is the calendar year 2020, is what's going to be used for the FY23 planning year. And we can see that there is an increase year over year. Because of that, we can anticipate that we are going to see a decline in our equalization grant, and we're going to see an increase in our local 5 meal share contribution. While the indicators shared today provide preliminary insights on macro factors shaping the budget, we understand this board has provided us with a clear compass on its investment priorities. In several meetings of the board, including last month's report on board priorities, this governance team has expressed its commitment and intention to continue to build upon investments in employee salaries accomplished in FY22, including the historic levels of investments in our clinic aides, transportation services, and food nutrition staff to enhance hourly rates of pay. This board's investment in competitive compensation for our current fiscal year, again, FY22, totaled $11.4 million. And board, you were aware that these were not one-time investments and that these enhancements to the salary must be sustained in FY23 and beyond. As we plan for FY23, the compensation and classification study called for within the board's strategic plan is providing insights that support prioritization of competitive salary investments. The study is ongoing and will include all job families, but preliminary insights guide consideration of urgent investment opportunities in teacher salaries and paraprofessional salaries. Regarding teachers specifically, preliminary market and financial analysis from the study positioned the superintendent to bring a recommendation to the board that would result in an 8% salary increase for teachers. The compensation and class study will be conducted in 4 phases and will set target compensation goals for all job families, and we have nearly 90 job families. With these goals established, a multi-year plan can be designed to ensure progress is achieved towards targets in this budget cycle, which is FY23, and those to come. The most significant part of any school system's budget is the investments made in personnel. As you can see from the pie chart at the bottom of the slide, salaries account for nearly 90% of all expenditures of our school system. And so on a per student basis, this is an investment of $8,562 per student. We know that our system's ability to attract and retain the best talent in the profession is key to advancing opportunities, access, and outcomes for our students. And we will pursue the board's commitment to invest in competitive compensation for Henry County Schools employees. I'll conclude with a review of some key timelines within the budget calendar, including the addition of a board budget workshop in March 26th specifically. We anticipate a tentative budget and holding the first of 2 required budget hearings on April 18th, 2022. The second budget hearing and final budget adoption are planned for May 9th, 2022. Madam Superintendent, that concludes what I've prepared, and I turn it back to you.